In this lesson, we'll learn what it means to expand an object and why we might want to do just that. Alright, now at certain times when you're creating artwork within Illustrator, you may find the need to expand artwork. That means separate the different components of that artwork. Now, let's just take a look here at the artwork in front of us. If we look here at this basic circle, we can see here that this circle has an orange fill applied to it with a darker orange stroke. Expanding this object is going to allow us to separate the stroke from the fill so we can manipulate those as two separate objects. Now I've got some other objects here that we're going to talk about in just a moment, but let me go ahead and show you where you can actually expand this object. I'm going to come up here and choose Object and then Expand. Now there's actually two different types of expanding here, and we have one here for expand and then one for expand appearance. Notice the expand appearance is grayed out. We're going to talk about that here in just a moment, so let's just choose expand for right now and let's see exactly what happens. We get a little dialog that opens up and we have some expanding options here. Now notice that the object option is grayed out. It's not available to us. This option is for more advanced type of objects in Illustrator, like a blend or a flare or maybe even an envelope of some kind. Now, I know we haven't talked about any of those yet. Don't worry about that just yet. Let's just take a look here at these two options here. Now, the fill option is going to expand the fill of the object, and the stroke option is quite simply going to expand the stroke. Now, again, we have some gradient options here, but those are grayed out too because we're not working with a gradient. We'll check this gradient below down out here in just a few minutes, but let's go ahead and hit OK on this now with both the fill and the stroke selected. Alright, now we have expanded this ellipse. Now, notice here that we now have a question mark for the fill because we have two different objects actually selected and they have different fills. That's why we have a question mark there. So, I tell you what, when we expand an object like this, it actually leaves us with what's known as a group. We're not going to get into groups too much right now. We're actually going to talk about that in the next lesson. So, I tell you what I'm going to do is I'm going to ungroup this so we can actually just manipulate these as two objects here. So, let me just go ahead and move the stroke here, and you can see here now if I select just that stroke, we now have a filled object instead of a stroke. We can now modify this as its own object independent of the fill if we need to. So let me just undo that here. Maybe we want to come in and use our direct select arrow to select a couple of these anchor points here. And then maybe we use our scale tool to just modify the scale and squeeze those in some. So, whatever you want to do, whatever reason you may have for separating the fill from the stroke, the expand is where you want to look to do that. Now, let me just move over here and show you another example. Here's a really simple illustration of a leaf. Now, if we look at this leaf, we can see that it was built with one stroked path and then a filled closed path right here that also has a stroke around it. So if I go ahead and select both of these two objects, we can come up here to Object and choose Expand again. Now I'm going to go ahead and leave both of these filled here, but let me just go ahead and hit OK on that, and you can see here that we're left with a filled shape again for the stem. And again, we've got mixed appearances for our fills here. If I were to ungroup those, we could actually modify that stroke as a fill, similar to the ellipse we just looked at. Now, one reason you may want to do that with an object such as this one is so that maybe you will have a need to combine the stroke here around the leaf portion with the stroke that was the stem of the leaf. So this is all one shape. So maybe you could come in and combine that using the Shape Builder tool or the Pathfinder. And we haven't talked about either one of those, but we definitely will here in upcoming lessons, so hang with me. Let's go ahead and take a look at this gradient down here. Let's go ahead and select that one, and let's go ahead and go to Object and choose Expand here. Now notice that the gradient options are available to us. We can either create a gradient, a mesh object with this first option, and we haven't talked about that yet, but let's go ahead and just specify this second option for right now. Now what this is going to do is it's going to split our gradient into individual pieces, creating the illusion of a gradient. Now, right now it's going to create 255 different objects. Let me go ahead and select that and hit OK. And now the fewer objects that you select, the wider the bands are going to be. And you may actually have the appearance of banding within your gradient here. Now, I tell you what, if we go ahead and zoom in really tightly on this rectangle, and we'll be able to see the individual bands that are creating the illusion of this gradient. So we'll just zoom in really tightly, and you can kind of see the segmentation here. Let me go ahead and just choose my selection tool, and I'm going to go ahead and enter into what's known as isolation mode. Now we're going to talk about this in the next lesson when we talk about groups, but this is going to allow me to come in and select the individual bands that make up this gradient. So you can see here that we now have a lot of different rectangles here that actually make up our gradient. So let me just zoom out here, exit out of isolation mode. Now let's come take a look at this last object here. Now this object, if you remember, was a brush stroke that we created. So this is just simply a path. Now let's say, for example, that maybe you've created a custom brush stroke out of some artwork like this tree, and you've actually deleted the original artwork or for some reason lost track of that, and you still have the brush created though. You can actually get the original artwork from this brush stroke. All you have to do is expand that. Now this is a little more complex of an object though. We've got a custom brush stroke applied to it. So in order to pull the original object out, when we go to Object, Expand is actually going to be grayed out. We're just going to be presented with the Expand Appearance option here. So if we go ahead and expand the appearance on that, we don't get a dialog that comes up. It simply expands the appearance here. And again, we're left with a group of objects. So let me go ahead and ungroup that here. And you can see that we can pull this apart, and it's exactly the same as the artwork that we used to create this tree in order to create this custom brush stroke. So all these shapes in a few lessons ago that we created with the blob brush, they're still intact. So let me just undo that a few times. And we'll zoom out here. And let's take a look at one more example. Now over here I've got some of the components of our logo. Now let me just show you an example of the way I used the expand option when I was building this logo. So we come in here and look here at this perimeter of this tree stump right here. It looks like it's just a stroked object with maybe 2 strokes applied to it, but actually this object, if we separate this out, you can see here that these are actually filled objects here. These what look to be strokes. And the way I actually did this was I added a stroke there, and then I expanded this original object with this brown stroke, and then I added another stroke around the brown stroke and expanded that. That's why there's a black stroke on either side of that. So we could actually pull that apart. And again, you see this is a black filled object. This is a brown filled object. So the reason I went ahead and did that on this logo is because I didn't know who might be using this logo, and you know, I can't tell if their Illustrator is set to scale strokes or not. So rather than depend on their Illustrator to be set to scale these strokes, I went ahead and just expanded them and created filled objects out of them. So in this lesson we have looked at expanding objects and how we can break down an object into multiple objects using the expand controls. In the next lesson, we're going to talk about arranging our objects into groups.